Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reading you a true crime story called Consumed by Desire from the book True Crime Case Histories, volumes 4 to 6. If I pronounce any names wrong, I do apologize. 18-year-old Heather Gibson was in her senior year at Lloyd Norrix High School in Kalamazoo when she first met Chadwick Chad Wiersma. The young and naive girl was thrilled that an older boy liked her, but it was his bad boy nature that intrigued her the most. Chad was a stocky blonde that grew up in a middle-class family just outside of Kalamazoo, but he had a knack for getting into more trouble than his siblings. At 20 years old, although he had a job and an apartment of his own, he'd had a few brushes with the law, which eventually resulted in felony conviction. When Heather and Chad first began dating in 1993, she lived with her parents and younger sister in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Kalamazoo, Michigan. Though Heather was smitten with him, her parents could tell that the young man was trouble. Her father, Robert Gibson, knew Chad wasn't an ordinary kid. Robert tried to convince his daughter that she should avoid Chad and concentrate on school, but it was too late. Like any teenage girl, she was deep into her schoolgirl crush. However, her father was right. It only took a few months before Heather realized that the relationship with Chad wasn't going to work. When she told him she thought they should start seeing other people, Chad became enraged. He forced her into her car and told her to drive. They drove to a remote location where he berated her. Chad exploded in anger, telling her she absolutely couldn't leave him. He threatened her and told her he would kill her and her family if she ever left him. Heather pleaded with him for hours before he eventually calmed down, but it was only temporary. Heather reluctantly agreed to continue dating Chad, but his obsessive jealousy continued. He constantly watched every move she made. He repeatedly accused her of flirting with other young men. The couple constantly argued, and it all came to a boiling point in December 1993. She told him it was over, turned her back on him, and walked to her car. In a rage, Chad pulled his own car in behind hers in the parking lot so she couldn't drive away. He got out of the car and stomped over to her driver's side window and screamed at her through the glass. Although Heather tried to calm him down, it was no use. His mind was gone in a testosterone-fueled rage. Using a large rock, Chad smashed her driver's side window and dragged her out of the car onto the pavement. After a crowd of witnesses gathered around, she managed to calm him down. She screamed at him that it was over for good this time. He eventually moved his car and Heather drove away. At home, Heather's father was livid and stressed to his point that Chad was trouble. Heather's father was livid and stressed his point that Chad was trouble. She really needed to end the relationship for good. For the next 4 months, Heather managed to stay away from Chad, but he was persistent and persuasive. By the spring of 1994, they'd made up and she had moved in with him. She was convinced he had really changed this time. Heather's father, however, wasn't as forgiving. He made it clear that Chad was never to be welcomed in their home. Over the next 2 years, Heather and Chad's relationship was a yo-yo. They broke up, got back together, and broke up again so many times that their friends lost count. But finally, in February 1996, Heather broke it off with him one last time. She moved out of his apartment and back home with her parents. This time, it was for good. Chad was not one to accept rejection. Over the next month, he obsessively asked friends if she was dating someone else. He asked them to spy on her and couldn't stand the thought that she could be with another man. Each time he called her at home, her father would answer and immediately hang up on him. Chad grew frustrated that he couldn't talk to Heather and had heard rumors that she was dating someone new. His drug and alcohol use fueled his rage until eventually he couldn't take anymore. In late March, he asked his co-worker, Robert Burr, multiple times to call the house, ask for Heather, and then hand the phone to him. When the trick no longer worked, Chad asked him to help him get a gun. Robert knew that with Chad's prior felony, he couldn't legally possess a gun. He knew helping Chad get a gun was a crime and turned him down. Chad was desperate. He asked other co-workers, but all knew of his prior record and refused to help him. On April 1st, Chad visited with a friend, Eric Edgerson. Eric had been cleaning a 9mm pistol that evening as the two of them drank gin and orange juice, smoked pot, and snorted some cocaine. When he finished cleaning the gun, he set it on top of a stereo speaker. Later in the evening, Chad grabbed the gun off the speaker and fired it inside the house. Eric screamed at him, "What the fuck are you doing?" Chad only laughed and claimed it went off by accident. He set the gun back down and the two continued partying. By the early morning hours, Chad was too drunk and high to go home, so he slept on the couch. When Eric woke up the next morning, Chad and the gun were gone. Eric drove to Kalamazoo to look for Chad and the gun. He too knew that Chad wasn't allowed to carry a gun. Eric drove to both his apartment and his grandmother's house, but there was no sign of Chad or the gun. Knowing of his felony conviction and his rage toward Heather, Eric drove to the police station to report the gun stolen. Late that morning, Chad drove to another co-worker's house. When he arrived at Brian Kirsch's house, Chad immediately started complaining about Heather. He was convinced that she was flirting with other men. He ranted about Heather leaving him and how she wouldn't take his phone calls. Brian, however, didn't take him seriously when Chad said he was thinking about killing someone. Unfortunately, that would soon become a reality. In the early afternoon, Chad Wiersma left Brian's house and drove to Heather's parents' house at 4039 Duke Street. Robert Gibson was working in the garage when Chad drove up. Before Heather's father had a chance to speak, Chad pulled the handgun from his pocket and motioned for Robert to go inside the house. Once inside the house, Robert tried to calm him down, but Chad screamed, "Shut your fucking mouth, just keep walking into the kitchen." Robert walked into the kitchen, pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down. Robert desperately tried to settle him down, but there was no use. Chad's brain was boiling. He walked behind Robert, put the gun up to the back of his head and fired. Robert Gibson fell to the floor, his body curled in the fetal position under the kitchen table and bled out. With Heather's father dead on the kitchen floor, Chad ransacked the rest of the house, starting with Heather's room. He was looking for evidence that Heather had been cheating on him. They had been broken up for 2 months, but in his mind, he still considered it cheating. He ran from room to room, emptying drawers onto the floor, but found nothing to satiate him. Consumed with adrenaline, Chad sat behind the front door of the living room with a gun in his hand, waiting for Heather to get home from work. A little after 3 p.m., the door opened, but it wasn't Heather. It was her younger sister, Rachel, with her friend Melanie. The two 14-year-old girls had recorded the latest episode of X-Files and were excited to watch it after school, but their plans came to a screeching halt. Chad pointed his gun at them as soon as they walked in the door and forced them to the floor. "Keep your eyes down, don't look up," he screamed. Chad didn't want them to see that Rachel and Heather's father lay in a pool of blood in the kitchen. Chad screamed at Rachel, "I'm waiting for your mother to get home so I can kill your family all at once." He then pushed the two young girls onto the living room couch and forced one to perform oral sex on him while training the gun on the other. For several hours, Chad sodomized and tortured the two girls as Rachel cried for her father. All the while, he shielded the girls from seeing into the kitchen. After almost 2 hours of abuse, Heather walked in the front door to a gun in her face. Chad immediately grabbed her and shoved her over by the two younger girls, then took all 3 girls into the front bedroom away from the kitchen. His jealousy took over and he screamed at Heather, questioning her about her social life and accusing her of flirting with other men. He and Heather argued for almost an hour when there was suddenly a knock at the door. Chad pointed the gun at the girls and told them to keep quiet. It was another friend of Rachel's that had arrived to watch X-Files with the other girls. Eventually the knocking stopped and the young girl luckily escaped the ordeal. Chad told Heather that if she didn't go back with him, he would kill her entire family. Little did she know that her father was already dead. Heather had a knack for calming Chad down and eventually bargained with him. She offered her own life for her family's. She told Chad she would go with him and he could kill her if he wanted to, but to spare the life of the rest of her family. Chad placed the gun at her back and directed Heather toward her burgundy Pontiac Grand Prix. With Heather in the passenger seat, Chad drove down the street. Heather took her first opportunity to escape when he stopped at a stoplight. She opened the door and ran as fast as she could, screaming at the top of her lungs. Chad panicked, stepped on the gas, and took off in the car. When Heather ran back to the house, she and the other 2 girls discovered the body of Robert Gibson in the kitchen and called police. 90 minutes after Heather escaped, police received a call from Chad Wiersma. "I shot somebody and I don't know what to do," he told police dispatch. Chad told them he was at a convenience store and ready to give himself up. He reassured officers that the gun was in the trunk and the ammunition clip was in the glove box. Police arrested Wiersma and put in the back of the squad car, where he immediately confessed that he had stolen the gun from a friend and killed his ex-girlfriend's father. At the murder scene, police collected the 9mm metal jacketed bullet and a shell casing. After test firing the gun retrieved from the trunk of the car, the ballistics test was a match. Police also obtained fingerprints from the drinking glass at the Gibson house that was a match to Chad Wiersma. Wiersma was charged on 12 counts. 1 count of open murder, 7 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, assault with a dangerous weapon, 2 counts of committing a felony with a firearm, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. After psychiatric examination, it was determined that Wiersma was competent to stand trial. However, despite giving a full account of what happened during the questioning, he later claimed that he had no recollection of the events or anything that happened over the days prior to the murder. The trial of Chad Wiersma began on October 1996. He pleaded guilty to 7 of the charges, including all the sexual assault charges. This was good news for the prosecution, as the 2 14-year-old girls could limit the amount of detail they would have to tell the court about the traumatic events. Before Heather and Rachel Gibson testified about the ordeal, the judge ordered all spectators and media from the room. Only their mother was allowed to remain for support. Heather explained how Wiersma was consumed by desire. She detailed his abuse dating back to the early days of their relationship, when he broke the car window and dragged her through it. He went on to explain the events of the day and his threats to murder her entire family. Rachel told the court of the torture and abuse she endured as Wiersma threatened to kill her entire family while he raped her and her friend. His defense attorney asked to waive Wiersma's confession removed from the record, claiming that he hadn't been read his Miranda rights at the time. In court, he changed his story and claimed that he hadn't told police that he shot anyone. But the Kalamazoo arresting officers testified that he voluntarily gave the statement about the killing. The dispatch officer that took the phone call before his arrest also testified that he said, "I shot somebody and I don't know what to do." Wiersma's friends also testified against him, his 2 co-workers and the friend from whom he stole the gun. Regardless of his denials, Wiersma was going away for life no matter what. On November 19, 1995, Chadwick Robert Wiersma was found guilty of the remaining 2 charges, resulting in his guilt on all 12 charges. 3 of the rape charges received a sentence of 60 to 90 years. He received a life sentence each for the remaining 4 charges. The murder charge carried yet another life sentence. All of his sentences were harsher because of his habitual offender status. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.